Alright, today is Wednesday, October 16th, 2013, and I'm sitting here talking with Christina Kruise about the second part of her Unlisted project, Unlisted Second Steal.
Right.
Alright, so I guess my first question to ask you is, overall, how did Second Steal turn out?
It went really well. We had we had great weather, which was like the biggest concern in Pittsburgh. You can never really tell. But we also had great audience attendance. In most cases, our audiences were bigger than we had projected, so that was a major bonus. And then the shows were I was really proud of the work that went into them, the creativity, the ingenuity. Mm-hmm. So we're very happy with how it turned out.
Okay, and can you tell me about some of the works that were in the show in this go-round?
Sure. We had 3 performances in 3 spaces that were in 3 different neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. The first performance was a sound installation in a pop-up furniture store in a neighborhood that's really been gentrifying and revitalizing over the last, 5 years. And they had gone to different neighborhoods in Pittsburgh and took sound recordings as a way of measuring the vitality in each of those neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And then they mixed those sounds with interviews that had also been done and had 5 stations where visitors could come and listen to the recordings. And then we had 3 dancers who would dance through the space doing kind of movement-based stuff based on the sounds that they were hearing. And we also had, with each sound recording, there was a booklet that you had a question that you could respond to. So that happened over the course of 2 days. And then the second performance was more of a traditional theater piece. It had a script that was used, but it happened in an area that's primarily used for tailgating during Steelers football games. Mm-hmm. And it's around a bypass, so there's a parking lot, this bypass that's raised. Then the other side is a green space. So they took the audience on a tour around this space. They had a lot of projections that were really animated and incredible to watch, actually. Just kind of artworks in themselves. And then some QR codes that helped guide the tour. And it was an exciting piece because there were trains that would be coming past, and we had Zero Fossil, which is a Pittsburgh-based company. They provided a solar panel generator for us, so all of the energy was green energy that was used to make the show happen. That was really exciting. And then the third performance was in a neighborhood in Pittsburgh that historically was one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, very diverse culturally, a huge jazz hub during the Jazz Age, and however, development in Pittsburgh really just destroyed it. A lot of people were displaced. It broke the community up, and now it's kind of a no man's land. People don't go through it because there's a perception of it being incredibly dangerous. And so we had artists there working in a lot where there used to be a house, or 2 houses, but the houses had been torn down. And so we had 4 architects they built an architectural installation. Then we had 4 performers, 2 dancers, and 2 actors who created a performance around that installation. And it was really, that performance particularly was really rewarding because we had a lot of people from the community there who, represent big organizations in the community, and they all really loved the performance and thought that it opened up a platform for having conversations about things that are happening in that neighborhood. We also became really good friends with the pastor who owned the church next to our lot, and ended up painting a church for them, and that was just a really special relationship that we were able to build there. So those were the 3 performances.
Okay, and I know this go-round of the projects touched on the idea of revitalization. Can you talk about how this idea was explored and what you learned from it through these performances?
Sure. I guess the first thing that I learned was that the minute you put revitalization in a sentence, that sentence becomes incredibly heated. And one of the things we realized early on in this project is that when we put art and revitalization together, there was an almost immediate assumption that we were using art to try to revitalize, and that's not what we were doing at all. What we really wanted to do was question what revitalization is, and when you talk about Pittsburgh, revitalization always comes with it, and it's always a very positive conversation about how great Pittsburgh is now and how wonderful and all of these wonderful projects that they've done. And we wanted to see what that actually meant. Like, well, what is revitalization? What does it actually look like? Who does it really affect? How are we talking about it? And so I think all of the performances engaged with that a little bit. Each performance had its own sort of research question that it started with. In East Liberty, it was a lot of, the curator there was interested in exploring how the effect of her presence in that neighborhood, because she works there regularly, and how the histories of that neighborhood can be pulled forward, how you carry that with you. In the North Shore, where the parking lot performance happened, it was a lot about there not being a community there at all, except for a homeless community that they found out about that was the city has regularly been trying to get rid of, and so that was a big part of their conversation there. And then for the final performance, they were interested in not really carrying the past with them, but looking to see what could happen when you thought about the future. And how revitalization might look in that neighborhood that, maybe it doesn't look like that downtown or in another neighborhood of the city, but what does it look like there?
Okay. And how did you go about selecting the curators and performers for this go-round of the project?
The curators this time, we had teams of curators, so we had international curators who were selected. Two of them had worked in Belgrade. Mm-hmm. One of them, we knew she was very interested in the project, so we invited her to come along. We were familiar with her work. And then the three that were Pittsburgh-based, we had put out a call for curators in January saying, we have this project, this is what we're looking for. And that's how we came across our three local curators. The artists we did in a few ways. Some of them were continuing with the project from Belgrade, which was really important for us to have that that aspect in the project. And they were mostly the out-of-town artists. For the local artists, we had an artist workshop in probably June, I think, where we put out another call for artists, invited artists that we knew, and asked them to come and spend 8 hours with us doing like site-based exercises, and that's how we found all of the local artists.
Okay, and now let's talk about the project in Belgrade versus the project here. What changes did you notice happen? Were there any similarities? What kind of dialogues between the two have you noticed after completing the project in Pittsburgh?
I think this project gave us an amazing opportunity to really look at the structure of the project. So doing it once you do it, and you're kind of like, okay, this is what this is. But doing it a second time was like, you have the opportunity to really go back and look at the process of the first time doing it and see what works and what doesn't work. So working in Pittsburgh was a lot of saying, what does this part of what does the curator actually do? What is their relationship with their co-curator? What does community outreach look like here? And that was something that we were really able to expand on, was the community part, like building community partners, engaging with the community, doing interviews, and just learning about the space that we were working in. We were really able to put the time into that. Part of that's language. We speak English in Belgrade. None of us really spoke Serbian except for the artists from there. And in Pittsburgh, there are a lot more community organizations in neighborhoods in a way that there are some in Belgrade, but not nearly as many. I think the conversation part, how we put Belgrade and Pittsburgh together, is upcoming. That's part of our follow-up work. Is kind of our plan is to do a bit of an exhibition with photos from Belgrade and photos from Pittsburgh, and also to kind of raise some of the questions that have come up in both places. there were a lot of similarities between the two cities. Talking to someone, they spoke of both cities as having scars and being sites of trauma, because there's been a lot of change in the last 100 years or so. And so that's something we kind of are interested in exploring. But in general, like because Belgrade's at a place now where it could very easily look like Pittsburgh in 10, 20 years. There's a lot that, already they're talking about some smart city plans for Belgrade, which, who knows how that'll turn out. And I think Pittsburgh, it was at one point kind of like Belgrade, and it's the infrastructure and the state of the infrastructure and the way that people thought about it. So I think that's kind of what the relationship looks like at the moment.
Yeah, and going back to the question of revitalization, what kind of dialogues about revitalization did you learn after completing the project in Pittsburgh?
Well, we did a lot of surveys before each of the shows. We had 3 questions that we were asking people, and one of the questions was, what are your thoughts or feelings about revitalization in Pittsburgh? And the thing that's interesting is that we had very few answers that were outright, I don't like it. There was a lot of positive feedback, a lot of people saying, I think revitalization is great, I think it should happen everywhere, I want to see more. But I think the core of the answers were, it's a difficult subject. There are 2 sides to this conversation. One side is great and the other side is not so good. So I think that was one of the things that really struck me in doing these surveys, was how few people said, no, this is bad, compared to how many people were saying, there's more for us to talk about here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what were some really standout moments from this part of the project?
There were so many. This project was, I think with any project, there were a lot of moments where it was like you just want to rip your hair out. And so there were those standout moments that are like frustrating and kind of scary and overwhelming, but there were a lot of really positive standout moments. In the Hill, or in East Liberty, where we had the sound installation, I wasn't there for this particular moment, but after talking to some of my colleagues, hearing about these 2 little kids who came in to listen to the sound exhibition and finding this story about Chuck E. Cheese hilarious, and just wanting to draw on the books and interact with the sound, and that was really cool. I think in the North Shore, one of the standout moments was this girl, after our performance, walked into the parking lot, stood on a chair, and dumped a gallon of Pepto-Bismol over her as like a mini performance piece, somebody that we didn't know at all. So that was really cool. And then in the empty lot that we were working in, just the whole after-show conversation where people in the community stood up and started talking about their experience in that community and the things that they were able to pull out of the performance as being important. I think those were some of the major moments, but there were a lot actually. Overall it was a very rewarding experience.
Okay, and I guess my final question is, what does the future hold for the Unlisted project?
Such a good question, isn't it? I guess one of the things we really learned this time is that, Corey, Patrick, and I were producing Unlisted in Pittsburgh from New York, which involved going back and forth to Pittsburgh at least once a month, if not more. I spent 6 weeks in Pittsburgh. Corey spent a month in Pittsburgh. So it took a lot of time, and that's a large part of the budget in the end, is back and forth travel. So if we wanted to do this somewhere else, it'd have to be in New York. It's impossible to do it any further than Pittsburgh unless somebody else is taking those reins. And so that's something that we are figuring out But so far we have people who have worked with us in Pittsburgh, and they're like, we'd love to do this in Dublin, we'd love to do this in Belfast, we'd love to do this in the Twin Cities, we'd love to do this in Sao Paulo, I'd love to do this in Bosnia, So those are kind of all of the next locations that we're thinking about. Singapore has come up, but it's really a matter of finding, the people in those locations to be like, yes, I'll spearhead this and make it happen with our guidance, because, we've done it twice now and have some idea about how it works, but... We have a very wide scope.
Great. Great. That sounds great. Thank you again for taking the time to meet with me today, and we will be sure to check back in with you as time goes on and the project continues to evolve.
Sounds great.
Great.